Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. My name is Oussama Mezoui. I am the CEO here at Penny Appeal USA, joining you live this evening from Richmond, Virginia. Thank you to everybody who's joined us. I know there's many platforms where this is streaming. So good evening to you, to your families. I hope you're well. I hope you've had a good, productive, safe day on this Thursday. Really glad you could join us this evening. I'm very excited for a fantastic lineup that we have. And so from myself and the whole Penny Appeal team, welcome. You're joining us as part of our webinar this evening, which is part of a wider campaign on COVID and our attempts to provide financial assistance to families in need. Last year, with your support and the support of many national, regional, and local partners, we were able collectively to raise over 1.5 million US dollars that went directly into the hands of US families in need. COVID has had a catastrophic impact on American lives from a health perspective, physical health, mental health, of course, as well. Financially and economically, it has decimated families up and down the country from East Coast to West Coast. We did not realize, of course, that this would be a prolonged pandemic and that families would continue to suffer week in, week out, month in, month out. As part of that first effort in March and April of last year, which is impossible, it's crazy to think that it's been nearly a year, we were again able to help over 1,400 families in need. The need is so much that we decided to launch phase 2 of this campaign with the support of partners up and down the country. Families are still in pain, families are still in need, families are struggling to make ends meet. It's been a difficult year for many reasons. It's been a difficult year for all of us in our own ways. This evening, we have a great opportunity to hear from 2 panels. The first panel will be exploring mental health, physical health, and the impact of COVID-19 on the health of families across this country. I'll be coming back for the second session, where I'm hosting a session with Imam Khalid Latif from NYU and Brother Chris, the founder of LaunchGood, to be discussing the financial impact of COVID-19. So stay tuned. Lots of information is coming your way in the next hour or so. Please, of course, do look at our campaign and think of supporting if you are in a position to do so. We know that families are struggling. We know that not everyone watching this evening will be able to support financially. But if you're one of those people like me who are blessed with a job, who are blessed with an income and a home and are not having to worry about the basics, please do look at the link that you can see at the bottom, launchgood.com/COVID relief, and think about making a contribution this evening. It's really a very simple formula. The more money we raise, the more families that we can support. The campaign has been live for 2 weeks. We've been able to raise roughly $300,000, which is amazing. More dollars means more families that we can assist. 100% of all the revenue from this campaign, all income, all donations from this campaign are going directly into the pockets of American families in need. I want to read just a couple of testimonials that we've already received from families that have received cash assistance. We launched the campaign 2 weeks ago. So far, we've raised $300,000. We have already distributed over $100,000 to families in need. I'm just going to read a couple of submissions that we've had from the beneficiaries, people who've benefited directly from your generosity. One of the recipients here, she wrote, "Due to the current global pandemic, my husband has been unemployed for months. I haven't paid any of the bills or rent for the last 3 months. The rent is $1,600 a month. I haven't paid the electricity bill, which is currently over $700 in total. I have 4 children that I am responsible to take care of, but currently I'm not able to do so. I also don't have a job, so I'm unable to bring income for my family." That's just one of many submissions that we've had. We've had a family of 7 evacuated and currently split between 2 shelters. The mother got COVID while she was in the shelter. and there's no one to look after the younger children. She was a recipient of a cash grant due to your generosity. So this evening, we want this to be informative. We want it to be interactive. Please ask questions, leave comments, and we will try and answer those questions. We have some fantastic panelists, so stay tuned. And please, again, do think about donating whatever you can. LaunchGood.com/COVID relief. So now I have the pleasure of handing over to our first host, a colleague of mine, Ruann Elbassyouni, who is our national volunteer coordinator. Ruann, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam, Oussama.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, excited to be here.
Great to have you. All over. I'm going to hand over to you.
Awesome, thank you. So, hello and assalamu alaikum, everyone. As Oussama briefly mentioned, my name is Ruann Elbassyouni, and I am the National Volunteer Coordinator at Penny Appeal USA. Tonight, we have a great line of speakers for you guys. We have Dr. Suzy Ismail, who is the founding director of Cornerstone Marriage and Family Intervention. And I'm going to kind of give a little bit of background knowledge when we kind of like bring them in and introduce them. We also have Dr. Ahmad Yousaf, who is a medical director of intensive care unit, and Dr. Raisa Menejwala, who is a licensed clinical psychologist, also certified in grief counseling. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. We are so excited to have you guys here with us. So what we're going to do is just give a quick background of all of you guys' wonderful accomplishments. Dr. Suzy Ismail is as briefly mentioned, is the founding director of Cornerstone, which is a nonprofit, faith-based communication intervention organization with several locations around the world that focuses on youth, family, marriage, identity, socio-emotional wellness, and relationship building. She's the author of many books, including Modern Muslim Marriage, 9 to 5, When Muslim Marriage Fails, and several other works. She specializes in educating and empowering women, youth, and vulnerable populations by presenting a range of workshops, lectures, programs, diversity seminars, and corporate trainings, both nationally and internationally. As a visiting professor for over a decade in the communications department of Rutgers University and DeVry University, Dr. Ismail has researched, written, and presented extensively on the intersectionality of education, faith, communication, and culture. She has also served for many years as a student advisor, teacher, and board member of a local private school. Dr. Ismail has been interviewed on numerous media outlets and is often featured on talk shows, radios, and television broadcasts and podcasts regarding her work. She has presented on topics of marriage, family, parenting, identity, and teens at many public and private universities around the world and at the World Meeting Families during Pope Francis's first visit to the US. She has traveled to the border of Syria to work with refugee women and families, orphans, and continues her work with resettlement and relief agencies, providing integration and intervention. For many years, Dr. Ismail has served as an executive officer and director on several nonprofit boards, commissions, and organizations. Her humanitarian work has been recognized with numerous awards, including the Ambassador for Peace Award and the Visionary Muslim Award. She holds a Master's of Arts in Communication and a Master of Philosophy in Human Services and a PhD in Human Services focusing on family studies and intervention strategies. Dr. Ismail currently resides in Princeton University with her husband and 3 children. Dr. Ismail, it is a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you, Ruann.
And we will now introduce Dr. Ahmad Yousaf. Dr. Ahmad Yousaf is a double board certified physician in internal medicine and pediatrics. Currently, he's working as both a hospitalist and the medical director of the intensive care unit. Dr. Yousaf helps manage the care of most vulnerable patients in the hospital and helps bridge the gap between different levels of the care team, from their team of 11 hospitalists, to the respiratory therapy team, to the nursing team, and to the hospital administration, and so forth. Dr. Yousaf is primarily interested in making the healthcare industry both a better place to work for practitioners and a better place to receive care for patients. He loves his time at the bedside and wants to continue to help bridge the gap between the numbers hospital administrators use to make decisions about healthcare and the numbers physicians use to affect patient outcomes. Dr. Yousaf sits on the quality committee of the hospital and plays a role in developing and approving various policies that both directly and indirectly affect patient care. Additionally, he sits on the physician leadership board of the hospital, which takes a larger view of the hospital's impact on the community in which they work. Outside of the hospital, Dr. Yousaf is a proud parent of 2 children, the husband of a wife who makes his achievements look small, and an MMA fan. He's trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 3.5 years and has attained a purple belt as part of the GF team, and gets to train with MMA athletes who compete in the UFC. Other passions revolve around refugee medical mission work, where he's had the honor of meeting and caring for some of the most vulnerable communities in the world, such as the Syrians, Afghans, Rohingya, Venezuelans, and other refugee groups that have fled extreme wartime and financial hardship. Dr. Yousaf, pleasure to have you with us. And last but not least, Dr. Raisa Menejwala. Dr. Raisa Menejwala is a licensed clinical psychologist in the state of Maryland. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology from the University of Maryland. She also earned her Doctor of Psychology degree from La Salle University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where she trained in cognitive behavioral approach to treatment. Dr. Menejwala then went on to complete a postdoctoral fellowship in forensic psychology. She currently works at the Clearview Counseling Center, providing therapy for individuals experiencing a wide range of mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, social anxiety, anger, grief, and trauma. Wow, what an introduction for you 3, mashallah. I feel like I've done nothing in life. Guys. Again, thank you guys so much for being with us. We're really excited to get this conversation going and to really inform our audiences about the many questions that are kind of like in the air. And one of the most important and most popular topics that we've seen an increase to due to COVID is anxiety and stress, and how to cope with such throughout COVID. And so dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity is challenging for most of us under regular circumstances. Now, add a pandemic into the mix and a spike in your anxiety level is inevitable. There's a lot of uncertainty about COVID-19, and much of that is kind of outside of your control. And no amount of worrying will change that fact. With that being said, what are some positive steps folks can take to cope with the uncomfortable feelings they're experiencing? And whoever wants to take it first, take it first.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question with kind of some information and advice I give to my clients. Because of that uncertainty they have, a lot of them with anxiety disorders. So I like how you mentioned, just not feeling in control. So that's the first thing, kind of helping us restructure our thoughts. I think of it as like an inner circle of things we can control, and an outer circle around that, which are things we cannot control. So in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, what's in our control is things like, washing our hands, wearing our mask in public, sticking to a routine, our daily routine every day, checking in on friends and family, practicing our self-care, prioritizing our meals, just really taking care of ourselves. A lot of the times we get stuck in that outer circle, which is like being forced to work from home, things being shut down, if our loved ones get sick, right when life is going to go back to normal. So it's easy to get stuck in that outer circle. So, when you find yourself, looking at things you just don't have much control over, just taking a step back and seeing what is in your control. What can you do that can help keep you and others safe? And in terms of coping strategies, the regular exercise is definitely helpful for improving our mood. It can really help improve, mild to moderate depression, and make it fun. If you want to do like a fun Zumba workout in your home, or go hiking or biking, doing some physical activity is one of the first things we recommend in treatment to really get that serotonin flowing and those endorphins flowing. And it's like the body's natural antidepressant. Also for anxiety, deep diaphragmatic breathing to like guided meditation is really helpful. On the internet, you can find so much guided audios to help you meditate and relax. Some self-compassion meditation to remember, you know, to be compassionate with ourselves. Like this isn't in our control, what's going on with the pandemic. Um, being mindful is, being in the present moment. So taking walks where you're just kind of observing your five senses and not really being stuck in your head, um, can help you be in the present moment and not worry about the future. And also, and mindfulness is really built into Islam, with our prayer, with our salah, really focusing on that, reciting the Quran, reflecting on the Quran, doing dhikr, that's like a benefit we have, that spiritual coping. So that can definitely be helpful in terms of our uncertainty and our anxiety. And something else I always recommend to my clients, writing a gratitude journal. In Islam, it's important for us to recognize our blessings, recognize what we're grateful for. Um, like Brother Oussama was saying, like being grateful for, the jobs we still have, or our health, or our family. And that can really improve, our well-being, like keeping that gratitude journal, maybe spending a little part at the end of your day, seeing what you're grateful for. Um, and the last thing I wanted to mention, with the rising anxiety and depression rates, as well as suicide, which is something that's not talked about much in our community, but it's definitely on the rise. And, just wanted to mention the suicide prevention Lifeline that offers 24/7 free and confidential support if you ever need to talk to anyone.
That's awesome. I think it's really important that you mentioned. I think you kind of generalize everything and created like this wellness toolbox for folks to kind of take and how to handle and cope with everything that's happening and what they're all experiencing mentally. What do you think comes like when relieving financial stress as well can impact their overall well-being for families of varying incomes kind of levels due to the sudden changes in employment and the economic insecurity families are kind of experiencing aside from their emotional and spiritual wellness. So I know you kind of mentioned this wellness toolbox, but how have you kind of seen this impact your clients? And what other ways have you recommended? What treatments have you kind of recommended to your clients?
Yeah, so for like the grief, just the loss of a pre-pandemic life, kind of dealing with the grief as well. So I like to mention that grief is, like a snowflake, or grief is very unique, and people grieve very differently, and there's no right way to grieve. And crying can be very therapeutic. So creating like a grief survival kit, like developing new interests such as drawing, meditation, adjusting to your new life, how it is now. Reaching out to the community for support. It can be your family and friends. It can be your local, Muslim community to help you know you're not alone. And doing things that help you give meaning to your life. I know people feel good, feel really good when they're needed by people, doing like volunteer work or, doing some charity can really add meaning to one's life when they've, gone through a lot of loss and grief.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for covering that. It's definitely such a, statistics say there's been such an immense strike and kind of like people experiencing this. And so it's very unfortunate. And I think kind of like the advices you gave to how to approach and handle this is very important. Now, what I know there's been like a lot of misinformation about COVID-19 being shared across like social media and other platforms at such an alarming speed. You know, I know Dr. Yousaf, I'm sure you hear this a lot, as well as Dr. Ismail and Dr. Manjoura. What are kind of the most common myths about COVID-19 that you would like to kind of dispel for patients? We often hear people say, oh, I'll just take a test and then go, not realizing that they can be negative and at the time of the test and then be positive within hours. And so what do you think our viewers could kind of use to understand the differences?
So, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. You know, I think the first thing I'd like to say about addressing people's questions and concerns and anxieties, right, is a lot of times, especially in the current political climate, we're so easy to almost belittle somebody's anxieties or questions as being not worthy of the conversation, right? And so people who find, even on the far extremes of the debate, you know, find you know, that this is a hoax, which I was in a conversation yesterday with someone who told me that it was a hoax before they realized what I did for a living. They thought all the doctors were lying to the community, that people weren't dying of COVID. You know, so you have to meet people where they are, right? And I think if you start trying to start a conversation from a position of height, right, you've lost them already. So, you know, I think in the current social media era and right, the Twitter kind of era that we live in, where you get little sound bites to kind of smash someone down with feeling bad about their current perspective. You never really win people's hearts over when you do that. A lot of times when you kind of readdress a lot of things Dr. Manjoura said in regards to people's anxieties, where they are, why they feel the way they do, why they feel the distrust they feel, acknowledge those things, then you can really start tackling, you know, the myths and the mistruths that exist out there. But you can't do that unless you kind of get down to where people are today in this moment, with really justifiable reasons to be anxious and scared, right? I mean, the truth is an extremely difficult thing to find. You know, as a doctor, I'm constantly trying to search for it myself, and the truth keeps changing, right? Beyond that, right? We were told a lot of things when the pandemic started that you know, from very reliable sources, and those things got modified because as scientific knowledge gets unraveled, we learn more, and that can be even more confusing from somebody who doesn't have a scientific background or understand that process, because it sounds like we've just been talking out of both sides of our mouth. You know, the CDC said don't wear masks in the beginning, and then they said wear masks, right? And that sounds like somebody's lying to you, when really it had more to do with the context of supplies available, or our understanding of the airborne nature, the droplet nature of the virus. And so I think right now today, if you were to pick the 2 or 3 kind of biggest concerning misconceptions, right? One is that it doesn't exist, right? That's probably the one that is going to be the hardest to refute, because people that are dug in their heels in that position, you're probably not going to win over today, right? So that's more of a long game relationship that you're going to have to build with somebody like that. But more commonly is really trying to understand how we mitigate risk to ourselves, to our families, to our communities, and to those most vulnerable, right? The reality is, as the literature unravels over the course of the last year, the geriatric population, the morbidly obese population, and diabetics are the 3 categories of risk factors, along with immunocompromised patients in any risk category, are the ones who are most at risk. And so a lot of the decisions we make today are going to have to be not for our individual selves, right? Because for the most part, fortunately, young, healthy people seem to do reasonably well for the most part, right? It's that we have to start making decisions in the way our religion teaches us, which is we don't do things for ourselves or what we want, what we care about for ourselves. We have to start thinking more communally about the people that we're responsible for and who have rights upon us, including our neighbors and our coworkers and so on and so forth, beyond our immediate families and so on. So, you know, I think that's a big one, right? Is it isn't always just about you, right? We're kind of drilled down in the American psyche that, you know, I got to do me. It's about me. I'm doing fine, so my business should stay open. I'm doing fine, so I should do X, Y, and Z. I'm a healthy person, but really, going to Kroger, which is what we have in the South, or ShopRite, right, in New Jersey. Like grandma doesn't have a choice but to go and get her food from the grocery store, right? And so, not wearing a mask, which is not a perfect system, right? The mask is imperfect. Hand sanitizer is imperfect. Nobody's saying that these things 100% protect people. But there's a very important person to me. The reason I'm smiling, I'm sorry. There's a very important person to me mocking me because I use my hands in a funny way and I'm not good at holding the camera. So I'm just, but I love him for the sake of Allah. So now he knows. But, you know, the thing is, I think these are all imperfect systems. And if we meet people with the truth of the fact that we don't know what's going on, there's so many things that will remain unknown. And but the things we may be saying today, maybe not what we're saying tomorrow from the scientific community, and that patience and understanding our lack of really true understanding of everything is just an acknowledgement of our position in front of Allah Ta'ala, right? That at the end of the day, we don't know what we're doing. We're trying our best with the tools that we have available to us, and we have to work on it that way day by day. And building trust in that way is going to be the most meaningful way of making a change in regards to the myths.
Thank you so much for kind of breaking that down and going into detail about it. Dr. Ismail, did you have any experience in this or any comments that you think you could kind of add to?
I know, I think Dr. Raisa and Dr. Ahmad both did a great job of, breaking down for us some of the concerns that we're seeing. And I think, the key word that has come up in both conversations is really the impact of change and sudden change. Uncertainty is something that most of us struggle with. We come from a background and a culture that really prides itself on being monochronic, having a sense of knowing what's going to happen tomorrow. We're planners, naturally speaking. Here living in the West, we tend to be planners. And one of the biggest disruptions I think that's occurred because of COVID in so many different communities is that we can no longer plan. And that uncertainty has caused a lot of struggle and a lot of pain. We can't plan whether or not our children are going to school, tomorrow. We can't plan whether or not the universities are going to be open. We can't plan whether or not the soccer game that's scheduled for next week is still going to be held. And deeper than that, we're seeing the economic impact, we're seeing the health impact, we're seeing the education impact, and the inability to plan has affected so many people on so many levels. From an economic perspective, a lot of times when we think about, people who need help, our mind immediately goes to someone who is part of a low-income family, someone who is struggling with putting meals on the table. But sometimes the idea of needing help from an economic perspective is reflected in a sudden change in what is expected in terms of income. So the fact that a family may have been used to making an income of, 100,000 plus. For someone who struggles with making minimum wage, that may seem like, oh, that family is set for life. But with the high rate of unemployment and the loss of jobs, the loss of income, that family that used to earn 100,000 may be struggling on the unemployment that they're receiving or the stimulus checks. And that's impacting a lot of the emotional wellness that we're seeing in homes. And so a home that may have functioned in a structured way with, clear planning and direction, now suddenly there is parents who are losing their tempers because they can't handle having the children at home and not going to school. There are families in which domestic abuse, domestic violence is at an all-time high, and we're seeing it consistently. Children, we talked a little bit, Dr. Raisa mentioned depression and suicide rates, but we are seeing children in our offices at Cornerstone at an unprecedented rate. And it's heartbreaking to know that when we think of the unfortunate or those who are struggling, a lot of times we don't think of the average American family. We think of the family who is on the lines of poverty. But what we're seeing in terms of struggle is what would be considered the average American family who have suddenly lost that sense of security, of feeling like they know what's going to happen. And that's what I think as a community, we need to understand and address through this pandemic. We're not just dealing with a health crisis. We're not just dealing with an economic crisis. We're dealing with a human crisis. And it's a crisis that's affecting all of us differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was very well said. Mashallah, Dr. Ismail. Thank you for that. You guys very much so summarize everything very well, mashallah. We've learned a lot in just these 3 questions. May Allah reward you guys for your knowledge. I guess my final question would be, what are some tips that you guys would recommend to viewers on kind of how, I know we covered like how to handle anxiety and all the emotions that we're feeling, but also how can we how can they continue to prevent the spread of virus sometimes people, I'm not sure, Dr. Ahmad, if you've experienced this, but sometimes I know they said there's been a rise in patients after certain holidays or something, because all have been kind of interacted with each other. So, it's better to hear it from you than you. What are some final tips that you guys would kind of give our viewers in order to maintain their mental healthness, of course, and overall kind of physical health?
Sure. So I think from a medical perspective, without saying a lot of the cliche things about washing hands and hand hygiene and obviously wearing masks in public, I think we have to, again, right, begin to make routines and structures around us and social structures around us that allow for meaningful ways for us to have outlets from a coping mechanism perspective, while still preventing further spread, right? So we can't isolate ourselves so much so that we become more prone to the mental health issues that I've heard both of my peers discuss, right? But beyond that, create bubbles with people in them, right, to maintain the circles that are small enough and safe enough to still have outlets in that meaningful way. So you don't feel desperate on days like holidays, right? And you're right, exactly right. So the Christmas holiday, the winter break, we saw 2 weeks after that a tremendous spike, and we're still seeing the end of that plateau and downward spike related to people getting together. And it's because people are craving so heavily, right, just the human contact that we are all kind of meant to have with each other. And so and that you can never have through meetings like this, right? It's not the same, obviously, and everybody feels that no matter how much we tell ourselves. And so I think really constructing with people that you love and care about small, safe circles where you can have that kind of close contact, that meaningful relationship, and ways that still allow you to limit greater exposures is probably the most common sense way of handling the infectious spread. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is it has to go back to our understanding of our relationship, with Allah Ta'ala, and knowing there's never been a time more magnified globally how little we know and how much He knows, right, and how weak we are and how strong He is, and that acknowledge. Sorry, I may have gone out for a second, but I'm back. But that's all I was going to say. It's okay.
I just wanted to mention briefly that the pandemic has really transformed the mental health field. As you know, patients now have easy access to therapy from the comfort of their home. Mental health care is now being provided through telehealth platforms as well as Medicare. So it's really revolutionized the field. And insurance providers have also caught on, and they're now permanently covering teletherapy. So if that helps people feel like that's more accessible, therapy can be really helpful, talking through your grief, coping with your emotions, your loss, and adjusting to your new normal can be really helpful. It's definitely something I'd recommend. Psychologytoday.com is a great resource to find someone you can talk with. You can even filter it out to find a Muslim therapist if you feel more comfortable. And there's free mental health apps. If you check out the apps, there's some self-care tips and mental health apps that you can use for free. And there's also been online support groups. For instance, a lot of people have turned to this group on Facebook called COVID-19 Loss Support for Family and Friends. And it just helps people know that they're not alone. They have other people who they can talk with and kind of relate to on that level with how COVID-19 has impacted them. Another resource is openhope.com. There's a lot of podcasts on there, TV episodes and articles, and even book recommendations for grief and loss. So that's another great resource for those, really struggling and experiencing a lot of loss right now.
And Dr. Ismail, would you like to give some closing remarks?
I think the last thing that I just want to share is that despite the fact that we are social distancing now, that doesn't mean that our hearts need to be distanced from one another. And for those who are struggling with loneliness, those who are struggling, feeling like they are alone in this pandemic, reach out to someone, text someone, even if you're not comfortable going down the route of seeking the help of a mental health provider. I promise you, there is someone in your life that loves you. There is someone that wants to hear from you. I guarantee you there's more than just one person. But reach out. This is the time to reconnect. Yes, we're socially distancing physically, but it has become so easy to connect in other ways. Use that ability to connect and recognize you're not alone through this.
Jazakumullah khair to all three of you. May Allah reward you guys for everything that you do and for joining us tonight to educate our viewers on ways of balancing, our mental wellness as well as our physical wellness and the importance of those around us. I, again, thank you so much for your time. I hope you guys stay safe and stay happy. Last but not least, I'd like to say to all our viewers, you guys can, of course, support with $2, $5, any penny counts is our biggest motto. Visit our website, LaunchGood campaign at launchgood.com/COVID relief to make any contribution. This will go a long way. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here for such a great cause and initiative. So I appreciate your invitation.
Jazakallah khair for the event. Thank you so much.
We're now in January of 2021, and millions of American families continue to suffer the economic consequences of COVID-19 and this global pandemic. Yes, families received $600 or $1,200 from the government COVID relief bill. It's just not enough. If you're paying for rent, if you're paying for food, if you're paying for medical expenses and prescriptions, if you're trying to get your children through school, $600, $1,200 is simply not enough to make ends meet. With your support, last year we raised $1.5 million that went to families in need. Over 1,300 families benefited from your generosity. We've relaunched the campaign and we encourage you, please, today to help families in need. Visit launchgood.com/COVID relief to support these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you to Dr. Ismail, Dr. Manajwala, and Dr. Yousaf. To summarize, of course, we are in the middle of a pandemic, but what we're seeing is mental health issues, anxiety, stress, increase in depression, increase in suicide rates. And so for those watching, those struggling, like many of us are, please do seek help where you can. Speak to family, speak to friends. So much advice was given in that last panel. And I think there's a lot of things for us to think about and to take heed. Domestic violence, of course, is a massive issue. And so you can see at the bottom of the screen, we do operate a 24/7 hotline available to you any time of the day, any day of the week, 704-764-1773. Someone will pick up that line and offer you assistance and help in any way that we can. So for those of you struggling with domestic violence, please do feel free to take down that phone number and call if you need to do so. Our next panel is about the economic and financial impact of COVID-19 on US families. Having considered the health impact, we're now going to be discussing with two fantastic guests the financial impact and economic impact on US families. Since the beginning of March and the beginning of the global pandemic, tens of millions of Americans have gone onto unemployment. Tens of millions of individuals have lost their income and are struggling to make ends meet. Dr. Ismail, she mentioned earlier the really important fact that the economic impact right now is being felt not just by those who you think typically are in, say, the lowest strata of the socioeconomic strata. These are individuals, middle-class individuals, people that had dual incomes, families that never ever had to ask for assistance before, now finding themselves lining up in soup kitchens and food banks and needing assistance and needing help. And of course, that could happen to any one of us. And so I invite the panelists to join me. We have with us Imam, Khalid, Latif, and we have with us Brother Chris Abdurrahman Blauvelt. Welcome to both of you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
So, mashallah, both of you have fantastic bios, well-earned, well-deserved, long bios. But as a friend, I'm going to take the prerogative to shorten those bios. So, inshallah, we can have more time to have a conversation. Imam Khalid Latif is the chaplain, IC, NYU. And mashallah, needs no introduction. Brother Chris is the founder and CEO of LaunchGood, the world's biggest Muslim fundraising platform. Welcome to both of you. I really appreciate having you here. You're, of course, both partners on this campaign, alhamdulillah, which we launched 2 weeks ago. And I should thank all of our other partners, and there's over 15 or 20 to name. So they are all listed on the LaunchGood page. So please do have a look at that list of partners who are supporting these efforts. Chris, I'm going to come to you first and ask you about, clearly LaunchGood is a peer-to-peer fundraising platform. Mashallah, it's a avenue, it's a vehicle, for good. What have you seen on your platform these last 9-10 months? And what have you learned? What have you observed from the pandemic and people's desire to assist and to help? What have you seen on the platform?
Hey, assalamu alaikum, Oussama and Imam Khalid. So good to be with you guys. I mean, we didn't know what to expect. Honestly, we thought it might be a rough go at the start of the pandemic. You know, people losing their jobs, people in difficult situations. And that's definitely true. But we also know it's a weird kind of recession or pandemic that has not affected those making a lot of money. And in a very inspiring way, those who have good jobs and are established, etc., they are really showing up to support. And we've experienced that in our own platform. We almost tripled giving triple through our platform in 2020. And we're hoping we can maintain that in 2021, because like you said, the need's not really going away for many people. And it's just a beautiful thing to see that so many people raising money, so many people doing good work, people excited. Like when you put together your campaign the first time around, people were really eager to give, jump in, be part of it. And I'll be honest with someone, when you launch the second one in January, you're like, okay, we got these big goals. And I'm like, I don't know, people are kind of tired of COVID at this point. Maybe it really doesn't have the emotional appeal as it did before. But I'm so impressed. I mean, I just checked out the LaunchGood, and I think over $300,000 raised so far. And that's it just shows that, you know, alhamdulillah, we have a very generous community. And, you know, every community has its faults, but honestly, the Muslim community is really generous and really trying to show that we stand for good here.
Absolutely. And Chris, I wanted to start intentionally with that optimism and that hope. You know, in the previous panel, of course, they explored the real tragic impact on mental health, physical health, domestic violence. But there is something beautiful and so much hope in the fact that we've seen, not we as Penny Appeal or you as LaunchGood, but every organization really that I've spoken to has seen an outpouring of support, especially financial support. So while a lot of Americans, millions of Americans are struggling financially, those of us who've been blessed, those people in our communities, and it's not just the Muslim community, of course, we've seen fantastic outpouring of support from all communities of all backgrounds. That gives me hope that in this moment of need, that people are stepping up. And it's not rhetoric, it's not rhetorical. We've seen it in the numbers. You know, LaunchGood, alhamdulillah, has tripled its revenue in terms of people's giving. Penny Appeal had its strongest year ever in 2020, despite the COVID pandemic. And so many of us are blessed, many of us are privileged. And I'll be saying this throughout this evening. If you are one of those people that are blessed, please do check out launchgood.com/COVID relief. It's really simple. The more money we raise, the more cash assistance we can give out to families in need. 100% of the proceeds are going to families in need in the form of cash assistance. Imam Khalid, assalamu alaikum, good evening. Imam Khalid, you're on the front lines. You're an imam, you're a chaplain. You're someone who people go to in their moment of need. And so I think maybe perhaps more than Chris and I, if I'm allowed to speak on behalf of Chris, are getting phone calls and seeing the real impact, financial impact of COVID-19 in communities and on families. Talk to us a little bit about what for you the last 10 months have been like and what you've seen.
The last 10 months, Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah, by the way, sorry. The last 10 months have really had a lot of ups and downs. In the onset, New York City, where I live, was the epicenter of the pandemic. And we had a lot of illness, a lot of death, both in the Muslim community as well as just the broader New York City community. And the influx of individuals impacted directly and indirectly just kept going up day by day. But the realities that many other cities and states in the country were experiencing at that time seemed to be a little bit distinct from what we had in New York and subsequently in the tri-state area. And subhanAllah, where there were so many communities of faith that I was engaging with on media outlets and in other mechanisms virtually right at the beginning that were focused on what can we do now that we cannot pray together or be in the space together or enter into a building together. And so much of the discourse was on what's not possible or what we're not able to engage anymore. What I saw from our direct community and Muslims more broadly around the country was the idea of seeing how do we adapt and how do we see where we can still be a source of hope and a source of healing for people in a time of need. And right at the beginning, we had a conversation on the first campaign that we launched immediately while the government was still trying to figure out stimulus checks that I think in a couple of weeks hit about $600,000, mashallah. But to speak to Chris's point, I think individuals who are really moved by a sense of personal ethic and values and trying to see not just where someone else was lacking and inadequate and labeling an action as being wrong, but answering the question, well, still, what are we doing right? And over the course of the coming months, there was so many different campaigns and opportunities that we saw Muslims from across the board, from PPE distribution to engagement of food drives and grocery distributions, but everything fundamentally still needed some type of revenue stream to fund it. And the opportunity to engage and to not live in a real myopic bubble, but to now recognize how so many different lived experiences were there. And the midpoint of it, I think what became hard for me was to see so much of the United States in a place that New York was in April and May. That the politics, the greed, the egocentricity, the selfishness that permeates so many systems and institutions really rose to such a place where it controlled narrative, and to the fault of those who are in leadership, allowed for now 400,000 people to have passed away from this country. And it's crazy that it took almost an entire year for there to be any moment of recognition of all of those lives that were lost from the highest executive office in the country. But on a personal level, just seeing notes from other Muslim community activists and leaders and imams and shuyukh writing about how now every day they get notice of a loved one passing away, a community member passing away. And in my head, it's, we went through all of this and there was such an opportunity for people to learn. But 30,000 people dying in New York City still somehow was not enough for everyone else to just say, well, how do we do it different? And so again, we wrap up at the end of 2020, and there's conversations now that clearly indicate that so many people who are policymakers do not value people over profits, and they're making determinations over where and how demographics that are in need will be further deepened in their need. And again, I would say I'm so proud of our community, mashallah, that even after a lot of people are struggling and a lot of people have given and continue to give, they're still digging deep. And in 2 weeks, for us to be blessed to be partners on a campaign that has managed to raise $300,000 and is going to still go for another 2 weeks. We're just going to continue to do what it is that we have the ability to do. And I think it's just because it's the right thing to do, and people continue to be pushed by that as a sincere conviction and intention.
You just touched on something, Imam Khalid, that I'd love to explore a little bit further. We know that the richest individuals in this country have made over $10 trillion more money since the beginning of COVID-19, right? And if the economic gap, the wealth gap between the haves and the have-nots has massively increased in these last 10, 11 months. And you speak, Imam Khalid, about learning lessons and about putting people before profit. You know, it's shocking. I just had to Google it to make sure I was correct. $10.2 trillion. That's how much the wealth of the richest 1% or 0.1% has increased, while literally Americans are going to bed hungry. Since May alone, over 8 million Americans now have crossed over that poverty line. 8 million Americans now crossed into poverty. We're in the middle of a recession, and I think clearly, naturally, because it's a health pandemic, everyone is talking about the health impact naturally. 400,000 individuals dying is more than all the Americans that died in World War II. I mean, these numbers are horrific. But right now, we're also in the middle of a horrible recession. And I think that element is being ignored. I don't think many of us who are privileged, many of us who have jobs, who have the security of shelter, you know, we think of 2008 and the recession that we experienced in 2008, but this is a worse recession, and it's a health pandemic, but also an economic recession. So, Chris, you're in Detroit, if I'm not mistaken, Michigan, which is a city that's seen a lot of deprivation and a history of challenges and struggles. What have you seen in your hometown, and what are things that come to mind when you think of the need for families right now?
Ooh, it's a great question. I mean, Detroit, for some context, when I moved here in 2010, 2 months later, they declared bankruptcy, which is the first major city to declare bankruptcy. And, you know, we have a very good mutual friend, Dr. Abdurrahman Al-Sayed, who is, of course, the youngest health director for a major city in the country, for Detroit for a time. And it's just, you know, you're talking about massive challenges. I mean, it's just like at every level, where you're thinking about environmental challenges, family challenges, economic, I mean, like jobs, everything. That's all affecting here. And initially, also like New York, when COVID started, we were hit heavy. We actually have a direct flight from Wuhan, China to Detroit, because they're both automobile, you know, hubs in their respective countries. And so, yeah, you know, COVID was here first and fast and hit heavy, and it really disproportionately affected the African-American population. Detroit's 80% African-American. And it was difficult. I mean, it's really difficult. I have seen, though, and I think this speaks to, we're going off topic a little bit, but I know you're policy wonk, so I'm going to go down this path a little bit with you. Governor Whitmer was really kind of tough when she came out and initially put a lockdown, and then we have another one, you know, that started around Thanksgiving, and a lot of people got upset. As you remember, they're like Michigan militia organized in our capital in Lansing. But honestly, like, our numbers haven't spiked like they have in a lot of other places since she implemented those measures. And so, you know, it shows that this is not one thing. It's not just people's donations that can fix this, but it makes a really important impact, because we need to put some Band-Aids on these wounds. We also need policy, and, you know, hopefully this new administration is going to come through, but it's just like, we're in this moment. It's like, how many months we got to really until we're through this? Maybe like 2-3 months. Like, we got to get the vaccines out. We just got to lock down a little bit more, be a little more patient, and inshallah we'll be through COVID. I really hope, in America. And a lot of smarter people than me are talking about, you know, by the time we get to spring and summer, we'll be free. I think for a lot of Muslims, we're hoping by the time we get to April 12th, when Ramadan's going to begin, we'll be free of this. But we got to work together at every level. So if you got money, be a donor, give. If every American should be wearing a mask when they go out. And if you have an ability to, you know, influence things as a business owner or in the government policy, this is our time to just knock it out.
Chris, you mentioned policy. I'm going to ask Imam Khalid. Imam Khalid, some people came out and said, well, why are you running this campaign if the government has issued checks, a second round of checks? Now, we know those checks are either $600 or $1,200. What would your reply be to those asking why we're doing this despite the government's COVID relief bill?
One, $600 is not a livable income or wage for anybody. I mean, in New York City, $600 could pay for 20% of your rent potentially, that, you know, in a month, let alone where and how you now have to manage rent, utilities that you owe from the last few months, landlords not really giving any consideration or alleviation of that. And this is a challenge, right? When you engage in an exercise that's rhetorical, in our tradition, you know, the Prophet ﷺ knows who's in need in his community, and he knows it in such a way where he can let other people know without it being something that causes embarrassment or humiliation. You know, the hadith that talks about the man who's made to stand and pray 2 rak'ah when he enters into the masjid during the khutbah, and people use as an evidence to say that you should pray before you sit. Subsequent hadith that describe that instance also describe that this person in particular that the Prophet made stand and pray 2 rak'ah was a person in need. And the ability for him to make him rise and people see him in his condition now allows for others who are in the congregation to know this person needs support without it having to be made specifically verbalized in some way. The challenge when you engage in rhetoric and experience is that you can have thoughts on things that you have no idea what it is that you're talking about at the end of the day. And it's a challenge, and I say this with love. Every word is accounted for, inclusive of opinions and ideas we have on lived human beings' experiences. I had an elder man who reached out to me 2 weeks or so ago who was in the hospital for hypothermia. He has a landlord, he has tenant rights, but he's still an elderly black man that lives in the supremacist society that we live in. And his landlord, who also is not getting money for rent for most people, says, I will fix the heat, but he's not fixing it. This man contracts hypothermia and is hospitalized. And he also then gets COVID in the car that takes him to the hospital. When he's on the phone with me and he's on his medications and trying to figure things out, he said that in the days before I was hospitalized, I had 3 days where I ate no food. And I've eaten now because I'm in the hospital, but I have COVID and I can't go work then for a few weeks. And who's going to really want to work with me after they find out that I have COVID? And it just goes on and on. That's one person who's a lived human being who's got to work not because of anything that he didn't work hard or try hard or this or that, but because the systems that are in place produce these types of realities for people on principles of racism and classism. And he needs support. That $600, $1,200 is not going to be enough. And he's one of numerous people. I had a mother who's a survivor of abuse that also is got 3 children that she is trying to feed. And she is facing a challenge because she has vouchers that indicate that she can have discounted homes and the government will pay, but people are not taking her vouchers. And so she reaches out and says, I have this much money left for food. I'm going to lose this apartment that I'm in with my children. I don't know what to do, and I don't have a job. And she's a survivor of abuse. So the compounded trauma that exists in a vacuum, let alone within the context of COVID, is not something to undermine. And that elderly individuals, widows, people who are survivors, people who have lost jobs, they have no health care, or they lost their jobs and in turn lost their health care, but they all have names. They all are individual human beings that need support. And if you can think about really what it is that you're saying, when you say, well, they're getting a $600 check, they're getting a $1,200 check, that's one of the craziest things that is so devoid of human understanding. And if you ask me what my personal take is on it, you know, when we reached $100,000 on this campaign, and I've been hustling, reaching out to everybody saying donate, because why not? People are going to die if we don't help them. And you can't think about it in any other terms. And somebody said to me in a message that I wrote that said we had raised $100,000. I got a response back where someone said, you know, friends of mine are saying you should probably not write that you raised $100,000 because they think that's too much money. So I was like, then those are not people that I need to chase after. If they think $100,000 is too much money, then they have no idea how many millions of people are in need right now and how $100,000 goes like that.
Yeah.
If we were to give $1,000 to 1,000 people, that's $1 million. And you're telling me that there's not 1,000 people that you can think of that need at least $1,000 to get them through the next month, let alone the next 6 months, 8 months, 10 months. And that disconnect becomes a challenge. And so conversations like this are important, but the actions are important too. The campaigns are important. So it continues to bring hearts together on active modes of engagement so that people can recognize what it is that people can go through, right? May Allah never make us those who have to experience hunger in order to understand what it means to be hungry, because that's a foolish way to learn what it means to be in need.
I mean, you know, from the $300,000 or so that's been raised, already over $100,000 has been distributed. And from those who've received some assistance, we've received some comments, and I've got a couple of them here. This is not theory. This is not theoretical. This is, before we get to the question, this is a quote we received. I'm a single father of 6. I've always worked and have always been able to provide for my children. Now I don't know how to tell my children that tonight we're drinking water and having bread because the end of my savings just went towards paying rent. That's an American, a neighbor, of course we can't say much more, who received cash assistance. I have another one here. A single mother writes to us, I am out of diapers and wipes for my baby. I have been wrapping her in towels and a plastic bag, and now my baby is crying because she's developed a bad rash, which I need to take care of. These are neighbors. These are Americans that we see on public transport, that we see on the street, that we maybe go to the church with or the masjid with, people we interact with, co-workers. People are in need and people are struggling. 10.5 million American children live below the poverty line. That's 2019 statistic. With COVID, we're assuming that is, of course, far worse. I mean, and so when you talk about $100,000 being too much, look, with $1.5 million last year, we were only able to help 1,300 or so families. And that's amazing. Alhamdulillah, we were able to give checks to 1,300 struggling families. But what could we do with 2 million or 3 million or 4 million? And then I think, you know, please tonight, if you're listening in, if you're watching, please go to launchgood.com/COVID relief and help whatever you can to help. I think there was a question on the screen. So many people have become zakat eligible due to zakat. Should we be encouraging to give our zakat locally more this year than before? Is PA COVID-19 fund zakat eligible? Imam Khalid?
So I don't know if the first part of the question means that people have become zakat eligible because they're giving their zakat. But
in need of zakat. There's more people than ever in need of zakat is how I read the question. So should we be encouraging people to give their zakat locally? And thank you, Bilal.
People should definitely be giving their zakat locally. And I mean, zakat is still a spiritual act, right? It's not an act that is meant to just be kind of singular gains for the giver, but there's components to it. There's the person who's giving the zakah, there's the beneficiary of the zakah, there's also then God, like in the midst of all of this, right? And so you want to affirm intention that can be multifaceted. It doesn't have to be singularized, but you can bring a sincere conviction to a gift that is going to enhance the barakah of it, that could open the floodgates for so much. Locally, there is need. Internationally, there's also need. to understand where and how, though, your giving is simply not just an exercise of you pushing a button, and there's not then the spiritual element to it that zakat is meant to do for you and for your heart. So you think deep, and then you say, well, where does my sense of passion really resonate? And where am I going to give in such a way that the sincerity comes from me? So I read up on people who are going through real difficulty. I look and see what's taking place. And I then think deep from a standpoint that says, is my giving right now so that I make myself feel better? Or am I giving with an understanding that I'm going to help someone else's life be better? And am I in a place where my giving is motivated by guilt, remorse, obligation? Or is my giving in such a way where it's given with real love? There's like real mahabba there, and I can connect with empathy so that it becomes an actual spiritual vehicle that's connecting me more to a sense of self, a sense of the person that I'm connecting with, and at the most deepest level, it's connecting me to my creator, who's the one that gave us all of it in the first place. And so you can have, again, conversations and discussions that would say that this has to be an either or type situation. And I would say to you that it should be a both and type situation, right? You will have people who will make arguments on either side of it. I sit with people on a daily basis who are in need and don't have so much and have to make real tough decisions on how they can simply get food and water. And I've been in refugee camps and in other places in the world, aftermath of natural disaster. There's people that do need in all of those places. And where your giving will be amplified inwardly and outwardly is that you're connected to your giving at a level that's beyond just the external act of it. And so how can you ensure you cover all bases? Give to both right now. And live the hadith that says that food for one is enough for two. Food for two is enough for four. So if that means that you got to eat a little bit less so that somebody else is eating, there's gain in that for you and gain in it for somebody else. If you've already planned what it's going to be like post-COVID and what flights you're going to get on and all these things, maybe take a car down to a state that's nearby instead of jumping on a plane and going wild on an international trip, simply to fulfill the intention that says that I know that there's going to still be people hurting. And I can promise you that our God is more merciful and loving than anything you can imagine. And he knows how badly you would want to go in the aftermath of being cooped up in a place for a full year to just experience something again. But you know that you not doing that will allow for you to give a little bit more to somebody else, then just give it up for somebody else. And where and how Allah's promises are true. And you can see it manifold, that you will never lose by giving. It will always give you an increase. It might not be tangible in your hand, but arguably you'll get it there too. But definitively, inwardly here, you're going to have a heart that commands a body that doesn't now give in to the nafs, but says that what's more important for me is that when I see someone who's in a struggle, then I'm not going to look at what I have to lose, but I'm going to see where they might have gain. And where you can do it locally, do it locally. Where you can give it internationally, give it internationally. Penny Appeal has programs that are zakat eligible, both globally and domestically. LaunchGood has projects that you can check off a box to see which ones are zakat eligible, and they'll just give you a ton. This particular campaign is zakat eligible. It is tax deductible. If you follow the Shia tradition of Islam, it's also khums eligible, where you can have your annual khums go to this as well under the jurisdiction of Imam in the States. And if you're someone who gives khums, you likely know what Imam is. And if you don't give khums, then you don't have to worry about it for the purposes of this conversation. But at every level, there's that opportunity. And I could tell you that where you give it to this campaign, it's going to definitely go a long way in helping other people who really need it. And that's something that I can give you a firm commitment on. And it'll make a big difference. Oussama was reading testimonials of people. I got a message from a woman who has a broken leg, 3 kids. She's living in a bus station because she needs food, money for food and money for other accessories for her children, things that little kids need. So she's not living in a home right now. And she said that she got approved for this micro grant through this campaign, and she felt as if all of the prayers that she was making had suddenly been answered. And what people are getting in that moment, I wish I could show you the eyes of people who feel not just the money coming to them, but they feel like they're not forgotten, that there's people who are actually thinking about them and that they know they're being remembered. That's the change that you're making. And there's people who are here on the ground who really need it. And there's people who need it in other parts of the world. Just wherever you give with love, and give right now in a way where it might make you hurt, but that's okay because it's going to help a lot of people.
Imam Khalid, that's a very powerful way, I think, to bring this to a conclusion. I want to thank Imam Khalid and ICNYU. I want to thank Chris and the LaunchGood team. They've been phenomenal in putting this campaign together. I want to thank all of our partners, including Imam, who are listed on the LaunchGood page. Families are in need. A $600 check, a $1,200 check, or even, we hope, under the new administration, potentially a $2,000 check, will not go towards paying the debts that people have incurred, will not go towards paying people's rent and medicine and food and health needs. Please do dig deeply. If you are blessed, if you are privileged to be in a position to help, please do check out launchgood.com/COVID relief and give as much as you can. Imam Khalid, Brother Chris, I'm going to thank you again for your time, for everything you do for our community. May Allah accept your efforts. Thank you for joining us this evening. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.